Right, so in a previous video, I spoke about how I was going to replace my arrays with mappings in the goal of resolving some of the scalability issues with my contract. First thing I'm going to do inside of my campaign contract is replace the approvers array, this whole line 14 right here. So I'm going to replace that approvers array. I don't want to work with this array of address here. This one here, I'm trying to highlight it. This one here, okay? So anyway, what I want to do is I want to work with the mapping instead, because with the mapping, I can add as many different values as I want with this thing, and I don't need to worry about it taking a long time to loop through it in the future, because I always get the benefit of the constant time lookup. So let's look at this diagram here. So here's my contract. I'm going to define a mapping where the keys are addresses and the values are booleans, and I'm going to call that mapping the approvers variable. The keys of this mapping are going to be addresses of people who donate to the contract, and the values will be a boolean always set to true. True means that these addresses are contributors to the campaign. But why are we marking it as true? Why don't we default it to be false? So whenever we try to access values inside of mapping, we say all values exist. And if we try to access a key we have never worked with before, we will get back a default value. In the case of type Boolean, the default value is false. That means that if I, at some point in time, try to look up an address which does not exist inside the mapping, I would get back a Boolean of false instead of undefined or null as we would in JavaScript. So we're putting true to differentiate accessing an address that has already been defined inside the mapping. So we will not actually store these addresses or keys with a mapping at all. Instead, we're going to have this abstract mapping that says if you plug in a certain address, that would map over to such and such value. All right, so let's go ahead and do this refactor. So I'm going to delete the entire approvers line. I'm going to delete this entire thing. So, all right. And I'm going to replace it with the new mapping definition. To define a mapping, I write out the keyword of mapping, like so. The type of key, right, which in this case is going to be a key of address, a fat arrow, right, and the type of value, which in this case is going to be a Boolean. Then I add the keyword of public, and I'm going to label the variable as before as approvers, like so. Okay. All right, so afterwards, I'm going to see an error message, which should be down here. Yep, there it is, where it says member push not found or not visible after argument dependent lookup is in mapping. So what that says is that inside of the contribute function, I'm trying to call approvers.push. Push is a method that is only available to arrays, not to mappings. So I have to refactor this to work with a mapping and not with an array. So notice how right now I'm taking approvers.push and I'm passing in MSG or message.sender. So basically the address of the person who's sending in this transaction and adding them to the approvers array. So I have to ensure I add message.sender to my mapping and give it a value of true. And that's going to mean that if I ever took message.sender in the future, I'll get back a value of true and know that this person has in fact donated to the contract. To work with mappings, we use syntax. We're going to use syntax that's similar to JavaScript objects. And so that's going to look like the following. So it's kind of like square bracket notation. Then I'm going to do message.sender. And I'm going to set that equal to true. Whoops, true. So, okay, and you see the error message disappears. This adds a new key of this address here to the approver's address and gives it a value of true. The address does not get stored inside the mapping, only the value of true gets stored inside the mapping. So now we can see if someone has contributed to our contract by writing one simple line of code. So I could do something like inside of the create request function, I could do something like require, and then say approvers dot, is it dot? I'm sorry, not dot. Approvers message dot sender, like so. Okay. So this will look up the approvers mapping and try to access the key of the address inside of it. If they have donated to the campaign, the entire block should return true, and we're going to require that it is in fact true. As you can see, this is easier to work with for doing existence checks. And instead of adding a complex for loop that might cost a lot of gas, I write the simple block to do the exact same thing. This is why we're using a mapping rather than array to store all those addresses. Now, I don't need the require line inside create request function, so I'm just going to take it out. I was just kind of like showing you how it would work. All right, so next thing I'm going to do is to refactor the request struct up here to add in the idea of keeping track of who has voted on a particular request as well. So just as with approvers, I'm going to use a mapping for that as well, and I'll take care of that in a subsequent video, so stay tuned.